Sarah tried to keep her tone upbeat, but the weight of her timeline sat heavy on her chest, a quiet pressure she couldn't shake. Jake moved closer to the partially built structure, the sound of his boots crunching over gravel and scattered nails cutting through the morning stillness. He reached out and ran his hand along one of the support beams, instinctively checking its integrity with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years building things with his own hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah held her breath as he inspected the frame. Solid foundation, he said after a pause. Framing's solid too. You've done good work. His words took her by surprise. She was used to skepticism, the raised eyebrows when people realized she actually knew her way around power tools. David had made sure of that during their marriage, teaching her everything he could about construction. His belief was simple. Knowing how your home is built makes you a better owner and a stronger person. My husband was a contractor, she said. He taught me the basics before he passed away. I've been learning the rest on the fly, which probably shows in the electrical setup. Jake's expression softened slightly, something flickering in his eyes more than sympathy. It was the quiet understanding of someone who knew what grief felt like. I'm sorry, he said gently. That must make this build even harder. Sarah shook her head. It makes it more important. David and I planned this together. He'd already ordered materials and sketched out most of the designs. After he died, I had a choice. Let his vision gather dust in storage, or try to bring it to life myself. The sun had risen higher by then, casting sharper shadows and warming the air. Sweat had begun to bead along the back of her neck. Jake, meanwhile, seemed unaffected by the heat, his years managing a ranch likely making him more resilient to such discomforts. What's your timeline? He asked, still taking in the work with an expert's eye. We were aiming for a Christmas opening, Sarah said. Now I'm hoping for Easter if I can somehow tackle 15 major problems and a few dozen smaller ones in time. She tried to add a touch of humor to her voice, but the numbers didn't lie, and the truth wasn't particularly funny. Jake turned toward her then, and she noticed how his eyes were the color of dark roast coffee, shot through with flecks of gold that caught the sunlight just right. What's the biggest hurdle right now? She pointed to the skeletal frame of the roof. Weatherproofing. I need the roof and outer walls done before the first big snow. If I can't lock it down in time, everything I've done turns into very expensive kindling. After that, it's the usual wiring, plumbing, insulation, walls, floors, and somehow making the place feel like a real home for kids. And you're handling all that solo? I'm doing what I can, she said. Hiring help where? I need it, hoping stubbornness makes up for the lack of experience in most cases. She caught herself and added quickly, I'm not going into this blind. I know what I don't know. But if I stop moving forward, then this whole project dies, and so does the dream David and I built together. Jake stood silently, his gaze shifting between her and the half-built orphanage. She could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating risks, outcomes, possibilities. Ranchers were known for that kind of thinking, always juggling unpredictable weather, livestock, and markets. How are you paying for this? He asked, his voice low. The question she dreaded most. The one she thought about every night while staring at spreadsheets that never quite balanced. Life insurance, our savings, a modest loan, and a lot of hope, she said. Her cheeks flushed as she said it, the admission exposing just how thin her financial margin really was. She added quickly, the counties helped. They sped up the permitting and cut some of the fees. The fire departments offered to do inspections. Local businesses have pitched in with supplies. But materials cost more than David projected, and learning as you go adds time to everything. Jake studied her carefully. And if the money runs out before it's done? Sarah inhaled deeply. Then I find more. Or figure out how to do it for less. Or come up with some solution I haven't thought of yet. Jake didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that made Sarah feel like he was reading between the lines of everything she said. She was used to people giving her looks filled with doubt or quiet concern, but Jake's gaze wasn't skeptical or pitying. It was calculating, measured, like he was trying to decide whether or not to bet on her. "You really believe you can pull this off?" he asked. Sarah looked back at the orphanage frame, seeing not the exposed beams and unfinished walls, but the vision David had sketched on countless napkins and notebook pages. Children playing in the common area, doing homework at kitchen tables, sleeping safely in rooms decorated with their own artwork and treasured possessions. A place where being unwanted became a temporary condition rather than a permanent identity. "I have to make it work," she said simply. "There are 23 children in this county who are aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Some of them have been bounced between homes so many times they've stopped unpacking their belongings. Others have siblings they only see during supervised visits because no family can take them all together. This place isn't just about providing shelter, it's about giving them a chance to heal, to belong, to believe that their lives matter." Sarah realized her voice had grown passionate, that she was probably revealing more than this stranger needed to know about her motivations and dreams. But something about Jake Morrison's steady attention made it difficult to offer polite, surface-level responses. David used to say that every child deserves at least one place in the world where they're genuinely wanted. She continued. "Not tolerated, not managed, not temporarily housed, actually wanted. That's what Hope Haven is supposed to be." Jake was quiet for another long moment, his gaze moving across the construction site once more. Sarah wondered what he saw when he looked at her project, a noble but impractical dream, a construction disaster waiting to happen, or something else entirely. "I've got a crew finishing up a barn project next week," he said finally. "After that, they'll be between jobs for a while. Would you be interested in some help with the roof?" The offer caught Sarah completely off guard. She'd grown accustomed to people expressing admiration for her project, while carefully avoiding any commitment of time, money, or resources. Jake Morrison's straightforward proposal felt almost too good to be true. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I should probably mention that my budget for professional help is pretty much non-existent right now." "Did I mention payment?" Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, as if volunteering construction crews was a perfectly normal part of his business operations. Sarah felt the baby kick sharply, as if responding to her sudden spike in heart rate. "Mr. Morrison, I don't really know you, and you don't really know me. Why would you offer to help with a project like this?" Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression becoming more thoughtful. "Maybe because I've been driving past here every morning for 2 months, watching you climb ladders and wrestle with lumber, and I keep thinking that if determination could substitute for everything else, you'd have this place finished by now." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She'd grown so accustomed to skepticism and polite discouragement that genuine recognition of her efforts felt overwhelming. "Plus," Jake continued, "I've got equipment sitting idle and experienced crews looking for work. Helping you finish this project makes good sense from a business perspective." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, hoping Jake hadn't noticed her emotional response. "What kind of business perspective?" "The kind where successful projects make the whole community stronger. And stronger communities are better for everyone's business." Jake's explanation sounded reasonable, but Sarah detected something deeper in his tone, something that suggested his motivations might be more personal than purely economic. The baby kicked again, more gently this time, and Sarah made a decision. That surprised her with its swiftness. "If you're serious about helping, I'd be grateful for any assistance you can provide. But I want to be clear about something. This is my project, my responsibility, my dream. I'm not looking for someone to take over or make decisions for me. Jake nodded slowly. Understood. You're the boss. I'm just offering tools and manpower. Then yes, Sarah said, extending her paint-stained hand once more. I'd appreciate the help. This time, Jake's handshake lasted a moment longer, and Sarah noticed calluses that suggested his wealth hadn't separated him entirely from physical work. She also noticed that he looked at her directly when he spoke, without the slightly condescending tone she'd grown to expect from most people who discovered her situation. I'll have my foreman Tom stop by tomorrow morning to assess what you need for the roof work, Jake said. We can probably get you weather-tight within a week, which should buy you time to work on the interior through the winter. Sarah felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months. The roof had been her biggest worry, the problem that kept her awake, calculating costs and timelines that never seemed to work in her favor. Professional help could mean the difference between finishing Hope Haven and watching it become an expensive failure. There's something else, Jake said, his tone becoming slightly more hesitant. I'd like to see your complete plans, understand the full scope of what you're trying to accomplish. If we're going to help, we might as well help efficiently. Sarah gestured toward her truck, where David's original drawings and her own modifications were stored in a weatherproof container. I've got everything in my truck. David was meticulous about documentation, and I've been trying to follow his example. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they walked toward her vehicle, Sarah realized that the morning had taken a completely unexpected turn. She'd awakened expecting another day of solitary struggle against impossible odds, and instead found herself accepting help from Cedar Valley's most successful and enigmatic resident. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as she retrieved the plans from her truck. Sure. What made you stop this morning? I mean, you've been driving past for weeks. What was different about today? Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression becoming more thoughtful. Honestly, I watched you climb that ladder while 6 months pregnant, and I realized I was driving past someone who was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Either way, I figured it was worth finding out which. Sarah spread the plans across her truck's tailgate, anchoring the corners with small rocks to prevent the morning breeze from scattering David's careful drawings. And what's your conclusion? Jake studied the detailed architectural sketches, his finger tracing room layouts and construction specifications. I think you're probably both, he said finally, but mostly brave. The compliment settled over Sarah like warmth from an unexpected fire, and she realized that Jake Morrison might be more complicated than Cedar Valley's gossip network suggested. Successful men who offered help without expecting anything in return were rare enough to make. Her cautious, but his straightforward manner and obvious competence made skepticism feel ungrateful. These are impressive plans, Jake said, examining David's detailed specifications. Your husband knew what he was doing. This is professional quality work. David never did anything halfway, Sarah said softly. He researched everything, talked to experts, made sure every detail was thought through. I think he knew this project was too important to leave to chance. Jake looked up from the plans, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. It sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I ever knew, Sarah replied without hesitation. And he would have loved seeing this place finished, seeing children running through these rooms and calling it home. The morning sun had grown warm enough that Sarah could feel sweat beginning to gather beneath her overalls. Jake seemed unaffected by the temperature, but she noticed him glancing occasionally at her expanding midsection with an expression that might have been concern. When's the baby due? He asked. Late October, early November. The doctor's being deliberately vague about dates, which I'm choosing to interpret as a sign that I have more time than less time. Sarah tried to keep her tone light, but the reality of her approaching due date created a constant undercurrent of urgency in everything she did. And after the baby's born? How do you plan to manage construction and a newborn? The question Sarah had been avoiding. The logistical nightmare that kept her awake long after physical exhaustion should have guaranteed sleep. I'm hoping to have the major construction finished before then. Interior work is easier to do in small increments, and I can probably manage that with a baby, assuming the baby cooperates. Jake's expression suggested he understood exactly how optimistic that timeline really was, but he didn't voice the obvious concerns. Instead, he rolled up the plans carefully and handed them back to Sarah. I'll have Tom come by tomorrow morning. Around 7, he said. He's been managing construction projects for 15 years, and he's good at solving problems efficiently. Between his experience and your determination, we should be able to make significant progress. Sarah accepted the rolled plans, feeling grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her project's prospects. Mr. Morrison, I don't know how to thank you for this. Jake, he corrected. And you can thank me by letting us help. You build something that matters. As Jake walked back toward his truck, Sarah realized that the morning's encounter had changed more than just her construction timeline. For months, she'd felt isolated in her determination to complete David's dream, surrounded by well-meaning people who questioned her judgment while offering little practical support. Jake Morrison's straightforward offer of help felt like validation that her project was worth completing, that her efforts weren't just the stubborn pursuit of an impossible goal. The baby kicked again, more vigorously this time, and Sarah placed her hand over the movement. What do you think? She asked quietly. Think we can trust him? The response was another kick, which Sarah chose to interpret as enthusiastic approval. She watched Jake's truck disappear around the corner of Maple Street, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the promise of professional help that might actually make Hope Haven a reality. Sarah climbed back up her ladder, but found it difficult to concentrate on the task at hand. Instead, she kept replaying the conversation, analyzing Jake's tone and expressions for clues about his motivations. Successful men didn't typically stop to help struggling widows without expecting something in return, but Jake Morrison's offer had seemed genuinely altruistic. The morning's work progressed slowly. Sarah's attention divided between construction tasks and speculation about her unexpected benefactor. By lunchtime, she'd accomplished less than usual but felt more optimistic than she had in weeks. Professional help could transform Hope Haven from an impossible dream into an achievable goal, and for the first time since David's death, Sarah allowed herself to believe that everything might actually work out. As she packed up her tools and prepared to leave for her afternoon doctor's appointment, Sarah realized that Jake Morrison had given her something more valuable than construction. Help had given her hope that she wasn't entirely alone in her determination to build something that mattered. Tom Morrison arrived at Hope Haven the next morning driving a truck that looked like it had seen actual work, unlike his brother's polished vehicle. Sarah appreciated the difference immediately. Tom's boots were scuffed, his jeans showed honest dirt stains, and his handshake carried the rough confidence of someone who'd spent decades turning plans into reality. Jake says you need a roof, Tom said without preamble, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. Let's see what we're working with. Sarah had arrived early, nervous energy making sleep impossible after 4 in the morning. She'd spent the extra time organizing her tools and reviewing David's construction notes, trying to prepare for questions she couldn't anticipate. Now, watching Tom examine the roof frame with professional thoroughness, she felt both relief and apprehension. Your framing's solid, Tom announced after several minutes of inspection. Whoever did this knew their business. We can have you weather tight in 3 days, assuming the weather cooperates and my crew doesn't find any surprises. 3 days. Sarah had been estimating 3 weeks for the roof work, budgeting time and money she didn't have for a process she barely understood. Tom's casual confidence made her timeline seem suddenly achievable instead of desperately optimistic. "What kind of surprises?" she asked, because experience had taught her that construction projects always included complications no one anticipated. Rotten wood that looked good from the ground, electrical complications, structural issues that only show up when you're actually working. Tom's tone was matter-of-fact rather than ominous. "But your foundation work looks clean, and the framing's been done right. I'm not expecting major problems." A convoy of trucks began arriving as Tom spoke, their engines rumbling through the quiet morning air. Sarah watched workers emerge carrying tools and materials with the efficient coordination of a crew that had worked together long enough to communicate without extensive discussion. She felt suddenly out of place in her own project, unsure whether she should help, supervise, or simply stay out of the way. "Ma'am," one of the younger workers approached, his hat in his hands and his expression respectful. "Tom says you're the boss here. Where would you like us to set up our equipment?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She'd grown accustomed to making every decision alone, but she'd never managed a professional crew before. The responsibility felt heavier than climbing ladders or wrestling with electrical wire, because other people's time and expertise were now involved. "Whatever works best for your process," she said, then realized how indecisive that sounded. "I mean, you're the professionals. I trust your judgment about efficient setup." Tom overheard the exchange and walked over, his expression understanding. "First time managing a crew?" "First time managing anything larger than my own confusion," Sarah admitted. "I'm good at following David's plans and figuring out problems as I go, but I've never been responsible for coordinating multiple people." "Here's how this works," Tom said, his tone patient rather than condescending. "You tell us what you want. Accomplished, we tell you the best way to accomplish it, and then we do the work while you focus on the next phase of planning. Simple as that." The arrangement sounded reasonable, but Sarah felt reluctant to relinquish control over details. She'd been managing alone for months. Every nail and board placement had been her decision, her responsibility, her victory or mistake. Sharing that authority felt like admitting incompetence, even when logic suggested that professional help would improve both quality and speed. "I'd like to understand what you're doing," she said carefully. "Not to interfere, but so I can learn. This won't be the last construction project in my life, and I want to understand how things work." Tom's approval was visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. Good attitude. Most people either want to micromanage everything or disappear entirely. Learning while we work is the smart approach. The morning progressed with the organized chaos of professional construction. Sarah found herself fascinated by the crew's efficiency, the way complex tasks were broken into manageable components and distributed among workers, whose skills complemented each other perfectly. Watching them work made her realize how much time she'd wasted struggling with problems that experienced professionals could solve in minutes. Jake arrived around 10 o'clock, ostensibly to check on the progress, but actually, Sarah suspected, to observe how she interacted with his crew. He stood at the edge of the work area, close enough to monitor, but far enough away to avoid interfering with the construction rhythm. "How's it going?" he asked Sarah, his attention divided between her response and Tom's crew management. "Better than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "Tom's crew knows exactly what they're doing, and they're treating this project like it matters to them personally." Jake nodded, his expression satisfied. Tom's good at making people care about quality work. He's been with the ranch for 12 years, and everything he builds lasts. Sarah watched Tom directing the installation of roof decking, his instructions clear and his expectations obviously high. The workers responded with the kind of focused attention that suggested respect rather than mere obedience. She realized that Jake Morrison's operation succeeded not just because of money and equipment, but because of people who took pride in excellent work. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, her curiosity finally overcoming her caution. "Sure. Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's purely business, because I'm not naive enough to believe that helping a pregnant widow build an orphanage is somehow profitable for your ranch operation." Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving across the construction site where his crew worked with steady competence. Sarah wondered if she'd overstepped, if direct questions about his motivations were unwelcome territory. "Honestly," he said finally, "I've been watching you work alone for weeks, and I kept thinking about my sister." The personal revelation surprised Sarah. Cedar Valley's gossip network had never mentioned Jake Morrison having family, and his reputation as a solitary figure seemed inconsistent with sibling relationships. "I didn't know you had a sister." "Had," Jake corrected quietly. "Emily died when she was 16. Car accident on Highway 12, the winter I turned 21. Sarah felt her chest tighten with recognition of profound loss. She'd learned to identify grief in other people, the way it changed their voices and shadowed their expressions, even years after the initial impact. "I'm sorry," she said simply, because elaborate condolences felt inadequate for such fundamental pain. "Emily always talked about helping kids who didn't have good families," Jake continued. "She volunteered at the school, tutored kids who were struggling, brought home strays both human and animal. Said every child deserved someone who believed in them unconditionally." The connection between Emily's dreams and Hope Haven's mission created a bridge of understanding that explained Jake's involvement more clearly than business considerations or charitable impulses. Sarah realized she was witnessing something rare, a glimpse behind the public persona of Cedar Valley's most private resident. "She would have loved this project," Jake said, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that comes from truly knowing someone. "Emily would have been out here with a hammer in her hand, probably bossing around my entire crew and making them enjoy it." Sarah felt the baby kick gently, as if responding to the emotional weight of Jake's revelation. She placed her hand over the movement, thinking about David's similar dreams and the way love could survive death through projects and purposes that honored the deceased person's values. "David used to say that the best way to remember someone was to keep doing the things they cared about," she said softly. "Maybe that's why we're both here, trying to build something that matters to people who can't see it finished." Jake looked at her directly, and Sarah saw something in his expression shift, a recognition that went deeper than shared construction goals or community spirit. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching Tom's crew make visible progress. On the roof that had seemed impossibly challenging just 24 hours earlier. "There's something else," Jake said eventually. "Something I should probably mention before we get too far into this partnership." Sarah felt apprehension tighten her stomach. Experience had taught her that conversations beginning with disclaimers usually included information she wouldn't want to hear. "What kind of something?" "The county's been having budget discussions about foster care services," Jake said carefully. "There's talk about regionalizing programs, sending kids to facilities in larger cities instead of trying to maintain local resources." The implications hit Sarah like cold water. If the county eliminated local foster care services, Hope Haven's mission would become irrelevant before the building was even completed. Months of work, David's carefully planned legacy, and her own determined efforts could be rendered pointless by bureaucratic decisions made in meetings she'd never heard about. "How serious is this talk?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, serious enough that Tom Henderson mentioned it at the last county commissioners' meeting. "Serious enough that you should probably know about it before investing more time and money in this project." Sarah felt the baby kick again, more vigorously this time, as if responding to her sudden spike in stress. She placed both hands over her belly, trying to process information that threatened to undermine everything she'd been working toward. "When are these decisions being made?" "The next commissioners' meeting is in 2 weeks. They're reviewing all county services, looking for ways to reduce costs without eliminating essential programs. Jake's tone was carefully neutral, but Sarah detected sympathy beneath his factual delivery. Sarah stared at the roof where Tom's crew continued their efficient work, suddenly unsure whether their progress represented hope or futility. If the county eliminated local foster care services, Hope Haven would become an expensive monument to good intentions rather than a functional resource for children who needed it. "Do you think I should stop?" she asked quietly. Jake was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I think you should make an informed decision based on complete information rather than assumptions." "That's not really an answer." "Because it's not really my decision to make," Jake replied. "You're the one who's been climbing ladders while pregnant, investing your savings, and working toward a dream that matters deeply to you. I can provide information and assistance, but only you can decide whether the risk is worth taking." Sarah appreciated his honesty even as she wished for clearer guidance. Making decisions based on incomplete information had become a constant theme in her life since David's death, but the stakes felt particularly high when children's welfare was involved. "Can I attend the commissioners' meeting?" she asked. "It's a public meeting. Anyone can attend, and they accept public comments during designated periods." Jake paused. "Are you thinking about making a presentation?" The idea hadn't occurred to Sarah until Jake mentioned it, but suddenly the possibility felt both essential and terrifying. She'd never addressed government officials before, never advocated for policy decisions that could affect entire communities. But if Hope Haven's future depended on county funding decisions, remaining silent seemed like surrender. "Maybe," she said slowly, "if there's a chance that information about Hope Haven could influence their decision, I should probably provide that information." "Tom Henderson knows about your project," Jake said. "But the other commissioners might not understand what you're trying to accomplish or how it could benefit the county's foster care system." Sarah felt determination replacing anxiety as she considered the possibility of advocating directly for Hope Haven's mission. She'd never been comfortable with public speaking, but David's dream deserved better than passive acceptance of bureaucratic obstacles. "Would you help me prepare for that kind of presentation?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the request. Jake's expression suggested the question wasn't entirely unexpected. "I've made presentations to county commissioners before, usually about zoning issues or agricultural concerns. I can help you understand how their meetings work and what kind of information they find persuasive." The offer felt like another unexpected gift, professional guidance that could make the difference between effective advocacy and well-intentioned, but ineffective emotional appeals. Sarah realized that Jake Morrison's value as an ally extended far beyond construction assistance. "I'd appreciate that," she said. "I want to make sure they understand that Hope Haven isn't just about providing housing, it's about giving children stability during the most vulnerable period of their lives. We'll need to present concrete information about costs, capacity, and how your facility would integrate with existing county services," Jake said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Commissioners respond to data and clear financial projections, more than emotional arguments." Sarah nodded, already mentally reviewing David's detailed plans and researching comparable facilities in neighboring counties. If Hope Haven's future depended on convincing government officials of its value, she would gather every piece of relevant information available. The afternoon progressed with remarkable efficiency. Tom's crew completed the roof decking installation and began waterproofing preparations, their work quality exceeding Sarah's expectations. Watching professional construction happen on her project felt surreal after months of solitary struggle with tasks that seemed impossibly complex. "They're good," Sarah commented to Jake as they observed the crew's coordinated efforts. "Tom doesn't tolerate anything less than excellent work," Jake replied. "He says if something's worth building, it's worth building right the first time." Sarah found herself studying Jake's profile as he watched his crew work. His concern for quality extended beyond his own business interests to include her project, and his willingness to share both resources and expertise suggested generosity that went far beyond conventional community involvement. "Can I ask you another question?" she said. "You seem to be full of questions today. It's been that kind of morning. Why aren't you married? I mean, someone successful, established, obviously capable of building and maintaining relationships with employees and community members. Cedar Valley must have plenty of women who'd be interested." Jake's expression became more guarded, and Sarah immediately regretted the personal nature of her question. She'd grown comfortable with their developing partnership, but that didn't necessarily extend to intimate personal territory. "Sorry," she said quickly. "That was presumptuous. I have no right to ask about your personal life." "It's not presumptuous," Jake said slowly. "Just complicated to answer." He was quiet for several minutes, watching Tom's crew with apparent concentration while Sarah wished she could retract the question entirely. She'd learned that successful people often guarded their privacy carefully, and Jake Morrison's reserved reputation suggested he wasn't accustomed to personal inquiries from relative strangers. "I was engaged once," he said finally, 3 years ago. Rebecca was a teacher in Billings, smart and beautiful, and everything I thought I wanted in a wife. The past tense suggested the engagement hadn't resulted in marriage, but Sarah remained silent, sensing that Jake was working toward an explanation that required careful consideration. "She wanted me to sell the ranch, move to Billings, start over in a place where she felt more comfortable with the social expectations and opportunities." Jake's tone was matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "I realized that everything I valued about my life was incompatible with everything she valued about hers." Sarah understood the conflict without requiring detailed explanation. She'd witnessed similar tensions between people whose fundamental priorities couldn't be reconciled through compromise or good intentions. Some differences were too profound to bridge, no matter how much affection existed between the people involved. "That must have been difficult," she said quietly. "It was clarifying," Jake corrected. "I learned that I'd rather be alone with work that matters to me than partnered with someone who doesn't understand why that work matters." The insight resonated with Sarah's own experience of marriage to David, whose values and dreams had aligned so completely with her own that major decisions felt like natural extensions of shared purpose rather than negotiations between competing priorities. "David and I never had that kind of conflict," she said thoughtfully. "We wanted the same things, valued the same things, saw the world in ways that complemented each other. I didn't realize how rare that was until after he died, and I started making all these decisions alone." "It is rare," Jake agreed. "Which is probably why I'm 34 and still single, and why you're building an orphanage while pregnant instead of moving somewhere easier and starting over." The observation contained an unexpected recognition of Sarah's own choices, the way she'd committed to completing David's dream, despite numerous opportunities to abandon the project and pursue more conventional paths forward. She hadn't thought of her determination as particularly unusual, but Jake's perspective suggested otherwise. "Do you ever regret not compromising?" she asked. "Not finding some middle ground that could have preserved the relationship?" Jake considered the question with a thoroughness he seemed to apply to all complex issues. "No," he said finally, "because compromise would have meant abandoning things that define who I am. Rebecca deserved someone who genuinely wanted the life she envisioned, and I deserved someone who understood why the ranch matters to me." Sarah felt the baby kick again, a gentle reminder of the new life that would soon complicate every decision she made. David's child would grow up without knowing the father who'd planned Hope Haven, but would inherit the legacy of his values and dreams if Sarah succeeded in completing the project. "I hope this baby inherits David's sense of purpose," she said, her hand moving over the active movement beneath her ribs. I hope someday I can explain why building this place mattered enough to risk everything we had left. I think, Jake said quietly, that children understand love through actions more than explanations. What you're doing here will make sense to your child in ways that words never could. The afternoon sun had grown warm enough that Sarah could feel sweat gathering beneath her work clothes. Tom's crew showed no signs of fatigue, their rhythm steady and their focus unwavering as they progressed through the roofing installation. Sarah realized that professional help was transforming not just her construction timeline, but her entire understanding of what was possible when competent people worked toward shared goals. "Jake," she said, her decision crystallizing as she watched the day's remarkable progress. "I want to make that presentation to the county commissioners. Will you help me prepare something that might actually make a difference?" His smile was the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "Absolutely. We'll make sure. They understand exactly what Hope Haven can accomplish and why the county needs it." Sarah felt hope expand in her chest like warmth from an unexpected fire. Jake Morrison's partnership offered more than construction assistance. It provided professional credibility, community connections, and strategic guidance that could determine whether David's dream became reality or remained an unfinished monument to good intentions. The baby kicked again, more vigorously this time, and Sarah chose to interpret the movement as enthusiastic approval of their expanding alliance. The morning of the fourth day brought the kind of Montana storm that reminded everyone why weatherproofing mattered. Rain hammered against the newly installed roof of Hope Haven with a ferocity that would have destroyed months of Sarah's work if Tom's crew hadn't finished their job with characteristic efficiency. Standing in what would become the main common room, listening to water slide harmlessly off proper gutters instead of pooling in exposed framing, Sarah felt grateful in ways that went beyond simple construction relief. Jake arrived through the downpour, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the Main Street diner, his coat dripping but his expression satisfied as he surveyed the dry interior space. The gesture felt both practical and thoughtful, the kind of consideration that suggested he'd been thinking about her comfort without making a production of his concern. "Tom's crew knows their business," Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Yesterday I was worried about weather damage, and today I'm standing in a completely dry building during the worst storm we've had in weeks." "Professional installation makes all the difference," Jake agreed, shaking rain from his hat. "Though I have to admit, I wasn't entirely confident about the timeline until I saw them actually finish yesterday afternoon." Sarah sipped her coffee, studying Jake's expression for signs of the doubt he'd apparently harbored privately. His willingness to commit his crew to her project, despite uncertainty about their ability to meet her deadline, suggested either impressive confidence in his workers or significant personal investment in Hope Haven's success. "You never mentioned having concerns about the schedule," she said. "Because they weren't your concerns to manage. My job was to provide the help I'd promised, not to burden you with my operational uncertainties." Jake's tone was matter-of-fact rather than defensive. "Tom's been managing construction projects longer than most people, but weather always creates variables that can derail even the best planning." The coffee was strong and hot, cutting through the chill that had settled in Sarah's bones during her dash from truck to building through the morning's deluge. She found herself studying Jake's profile as he examined Tom's completed work, noting the way he assessed quality with unconscious competence and obvious satisfaction with results that exceeded minimum standards. "I've been thinking about the county commissioner's presentation," Sarah said, broaching the subject that had occupied her thoughts since their conversation the previous afternoon. "I want to make sure I understand exactly what kind of information will be most persuasive." Jake turned his attention from the roof evaluation to Sarah's face, his expression becoming more focused. "Have you given thought to the structure of your argument? Commissioners respond better to organized presentations than emotional appeals, even when the emotional component is compelling." Sarah had spent the previous evening reviewing David's detailed plans and researching comparable facilities in neighboring counties, trying to gather concrete data that could support Hope Haven's value proposition. The process had been both encouraging and overwhelming, revealing the complexity of factors that influence successful orphanage operations. "I've been working on cost comparisons and capacity projections," she said. David's plans include detailed financial estimates for both construction and operation, and I found information about how similar facilities function in other Montana counties. "Good starting point," Jake approved. "But you'll also need to address their specific concerns about budget efficiency and service regionalization. They're not just evaluating Hope Haven in isolation, they're comparing it to alternatives that might appear more cost-effective on paper." The challenge felt daunting, but Sarah had learned that complex problems became manageable when broken into component parts and addressed systematically. Her months of solitary construction work had taught her that persistence and careful planning could overcome obstacles that initially seemed impossible. "What kind of alternatives are they considering?" she asked. "Primarily transportation to regional facilities in Billings or Great Falls, which eliminates local operational costs, but creates other expenses and complications." Jake's knowledge of the county's deliberations suggested he'd been following the issue more closely than casual interest would require. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she considered the implications of transporting local children to distant facilities. The logistical challenges were significant, but the emotional costs of separating children from their communities during already traumatic periods seemed far more troubling. "That seems like it would create more problems than it solves," she sighed. Children who are already dealing with family disruption would be isolated from everything familiar, including siblings, friends, schools, and community connections. "Exactly the argument you should make to the commissioners," Jake said. "But you'll need supporting data about educational continuity, family reunification rates, and psychological impacts of displacement. Emotional arguments are more persuasive when backed by research and statistics." Sarah realized that Jake's strategic thinking extended far beyond construction management and ranch operations. His understanding of government decision-making processes and effective advocacy suggested experience with complex negotiations and policy discussions. "Have you made presentations to county commissioners before?" she asked. "Several times, usually regarding zoning issues or agricultural policies that affect ranch operations. I've learned that they're practical people who respond to clear information about costs, benefits, and long-term implications." Jake paused, his expression becoming more thoughtful. "I've also learned that personal stories can be powerful when combined with solid data, especially when the people telling those stories have credibility within the community." The insight about community credibility created a new concern for Sarah, her recent arrival in Cedar Valley and her status as David's widow, rather than an established resident, might limit her effectiveness as an advocate for local services. She possessed passion and detailed knowledge about Hope Haven, but lacked the kind of long-term community standing that influenced political decisions. "Do you think my relative newcomer status will hurt my credibility?" she asked. Jake considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "It might, if you present yourself as an outsider trying to change local policies. But if you present yourself as someone who chose to invest in Cedar Valley's future, someone who's putting her own resources at risk to address a genuine community need, that becomes a strength rather than a liability." The reframe shifted Sarah's perspective about her position within the community. Instead of viewing her recent arrival as a disadvantage, she could emphasize her deliberate choice to commit to Cedar Valley's welfare despite having options to rebuild her life elsewhere. "David and I could have built Hope Haven anywhere," she said slowly, working through the implications of Jake's suggestion. "We chose Cedar Valley because we believed this community would support children who needed stability and care. My investment here isn't just financial, it's a vote of confidence in local values and priorities. That's exactly the message commissioners need to hear, Jake confirmed. You're not asking them to fund a project that benefits you personally. You're offering to provide a service that benefits the entire county, using primarily private resources and community support. The storm outside had intensified, turning the morning darker and making the interior of Hope Haven feel more sheltered and intimate. Sarah found herself grateful for Jake's presence during weather that would have felt lonely and isolating if she'd been working alone as usual. There's something else I should probably mention, Jake said, his tone becoming more hesitant. Tom, Henderson's wife, sits on the County Foster Care Review Board. She might be a valuable ally if you can convince her that Hope Haven addresses real needs that aren't being met through current services. The information added another layer of complexity to Sarah's advocacy strategy. Building support among influential community members before the commissioners' meeting could strengthen her position significantly, but it also required expanding her outreach beyond the formal presentation process. Do you know her personally? Sarah asked. Linda Henderson and I served together on the Agricultural Advisory Committee. She's practical, well-informed about county services, and genuinely concerned about children's welfare. If Hope Haven makes sense to her, she'd be willing to support it publicly. Sarah felt simultaneously encouraged and overwhelmed by the expanding scope of political preparation required for effective advocacy. She'd imagined making a single presentation to commissioners, but Jake's guidance suggested that successful policy influence required broader community engagement and strategic relationship building. This is more complicated than I realized, she admitted. I'm good at building things and solving construction problems, but navigating political processes feels like learning an entirely different language. It's not that different from construction. Jake said, you identify the goal, gather the necessary resources, plan the approach, and execute systematically. The tools are different, but the fundamental process is similar. The analogy helped Sarah conceptualize advocacy work in terms she understood. Political persuasion might require different skills than carpentry, but both involved strategic thinking, careful preparation, and persistent effort toward clearly defined objectives. Would you be willing to introduce me to Linda Henderson? She asked. If she's as reasonable as you suggest, I'd like the opportunity to explain Hope Haven's mission and answer any questions she might have. I can arrange that, Jake said. She and Tom are hosting a barbecue this weekend for the Agricultural Committee and their families. It would be a natural opportunity for informal conversation without the pressure of a formal meeting. The invitation felt like another unexpected gift, access to community networks that could influence Hope Haven's future in ways Sarah couldn't have arranged independently. Jake's willingness to facilitate these connections suggested commitment to her project. That went beyond charitable assistance. I'd appreciate that introduction, Sarah said. Though I should warn you, I'm not particularly skilled at social events where the real business happens in casual conversation. You'll be fine, Jake said with more confidence than Sarah felt. You're passionate about something that matters, and you understand the details better than anyone else. Those are the most important qualifications for effective advocacy. The baby kicked vigorously, as if responding to the emotional intensity of their conversation. Sarah placed her hand over the movement, thinking about the timeline that would bring new life into her world just as Hope Haven approached completion. The convergence of personal and professional milestones felt both providential and terrifying. Jake, she said quietly, what happens if the county decides against local foster care services? What happens to Hope Haven if there are no children who need it? The question had haunted Sarah's thoughts since learning about the county's budget deliberations. Months of work and David's carefully planned legacy could become irrelevant through bureaucratic decisions made without consideration of her personal investment and community commitment. Then you'll have built something valuable that serves a different purpose, Jake said after a thoughtful pause. Buildings can be adapted, missions can evolve, and communities always need people who are willing to invest in children's welfare. His answer didn't directly address her fears about wasted effort and failed dreams, but it offered a perspective that emphasized adaptability rather than rigid attachment to specific outcomes. Sarah realized that Jake's pragmatic approach to problem-solving included acceptance of uncertainty and willingness to adjust plans based on changing circumstances. You really think Hope Haven could serve other purposes if the original mission becomes unnecessary? She asked. I think you could make it serve other purposes, Jake corrected. The building is just a tool. Your commitment to helping children who need stability and care, that's what really matters. And that commitment can find expression in various ways. The insight shifted Sarah's anxiety from fear of total failure to concern about tactical adaptation. If Hope Haven's specific mission required modification, she could approach that challenge with the same determination and creativity she'd applied to construction problems. The storm continued its assault on the roof while they finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Sarah found herself studying the empty rooms around them, trying to envision various ways the space could serve children's needs, regardless of the specific circumstances that brought those children to Hope Haven. I want to show you something, she said, retrieving David's original plans from her weatherproof container. David designed this building with flexibility in mind, anticipating that community needs might change over time. She spread the detailed drawings across a makeshift table created from sawhorses and plywood, anchoring the corners against air currents from the building's temporary openings. Jake moved closer to examine the architectural details, his attention focusing immediately on elements that demonstrated David's thoughtful planning. These rooms can be reconfigured easily, Sarah explained, pointing to walls marked as non-structural. David planned the utilities and basic infrastructure to support various layouts, depending on whether we were housing long-term residents, providing temporary shelter, or serving as a community resource center. Jake studied the plans with obvious appreciation for David's foresight. He was thinking strategically about long-term adaptability. That's sophisticated planning for someone who wasn't a professional architect. David believed that good buildings should serve communities for generations, not just immediate needs, Sarah said. He spent months researching successful facilities and interviewing people who understood how children's services evolved over time. The conversation about adaptability had reduced Sarah's anxiety about county decisions while reinforcing her appreciation for David's comprehensive vision. Hope Haven represented more than a specific response to current foster care needs. It embodied principles of community investment and child advocacy that could find expression regardless of changing political circumstances. Sarah, Jake said, his tone becoming more serious, I want you to know that whatever the county decides, you won't be implementing those decisions alone. Hope Haven matters to more people than just you, and supporting this project has become important to me personally. The commitment felt both reassuring and significant, representing partnership that extended beyond professional assistance to include personal investment in shared outcomes. Sarah realized that Jake's involvement had evolved from charitable helping to genuine collaboration based on mutual respect and aligned values. Why? She asked simply. Why does this matter to you personally? Jake was quiet for several minutes, his gaze moving across the empty rooms that would soon house children whose lives had been disrupted by circumstances beyond their control. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of certainty that comes from deep personal conviction. Because Emily would have fought for this place, he said quietly. Because children deserve communities that prioritize their welfare over bureaucratic convenience. And because watching you build something this important while dealing with loss and uncertainty has reminded me that some things are worth risking everything to protect. The honesty of his response created a moment of profound connection, recognition that their partnership had become something more significant than practical collaboration. Sarah felt tears threaten, not from sadness but from gratitude for alliance that had transformed her solitary struggle into shared purpose. "Thank you," she said simply, because elaborate expressions of appreciation felt inadequate for the depth of support Jake had provided. "Don't thank me yet," Jake replied with a slight smile. "Wait until we see how persuasive we can be with county commissioners and community leaders. That's where the real work begins." The storm outside began to diminish, its fury spent against Hope Haven's weatherproof shell. Sarah looked around the protected interior space, seeing not just successful construction, but proof that determined people could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles through careful planning, professional competence, and mutual support. The baby kicked again, gentler this time, and Sarah realized that her child would be born into a world where Hope Haven existed not as David's unfulfilled dream, but as a functioning reality created through partnership with someone who understood the value of building things that mattered. "Jake," she said, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity, "I want to ask Linda Henderson more than just questions about county services. I want to invite her to help shape Hope Haven's mission, to become part of creating something that serves children's needs regardless of what the commissioners decide." Jake's approval was visible in the relaxation of his shoulders and the genuine warmth of his expression. "That's exactly the right approach. Transform potential opposition into active partnership and make Hope Haven a community project rather than a personal mission." Sarah felt excitement replacing anxiety as she considered the possibilities of expanding collaboration beyond construction assistance to include community leadership and strategic planning. Hope Haven could become not just her tribute to David's values but a focal point for everyone who believed that children deserved stability, care, and genuine belonging. The storm had passed, leaving behind the fresh scent of rain-washed air and the sound of water dripping from gutters that actually directed moisture away from the building instead of allowing it to pool in destructive puddles. Sarah stepped outside to assess any potential damage, but found only evidence of a structure that had successfully weathered its first serious test. "Ready to start planning our campaign?" Jake asked, joining her in the brightening afternoon sunlight. "Ready, Sarah." Confirmed, her hand moving protectively over the baby that would soon inherit whatever they managed to build together. The Henderson Ranch sprawled across rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods, its well-maintained buildings and neat fence lines testifying to decades of careful stewardship. Sarah arrived fashionably late on purpose, having learned from Emma Rodriguez that agricultural committee gatherings operated on informal schedules where punctuality mattered less than genuine participation. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple blue dress that accommodated her expanding figure without emphasizing her pregnancy, paired with comfortable flats that would allow extended standing on uneven ground. Jake met her at the gravel parking area, his relaxed demeanor suggesting comfort with social situations that made Sarah feel slightly envious. He'd traded his usual work clothes for khakis and a button-down shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders without appearing overdressed for a casual barbecue. His easy confidence in these community settings reminded Sarah that successful ranching required social skills as much as agricultural expertise. "Linda's already asked 3 people about the pregnant woman building an orphanage," Jake said quietly, as they walked toward the gathering. "Word travels fast in groups like this, which works in your favor. People are curious rather than skeptical." Sarah felt nervous energy flutter in her stomach, competing with the baby's increasingly active movements for attention. She'd rehearsed potential conversation topics during the drive, but actually engaging with influential community members felt more daunting than any construction challenge she'd faced. The backyard buzzed with conversations conducted in the easy rhythm of people who'd known each other for years. Children raced between adult groups, their laughter adding warmth to the afternoon air. Sarah observed the natural clustering of families around shared interests and long-standing friendships, trying to identify opportunities for organic conversation rather than awkward introductions. "Sarah," a woman's voice called from near the food tables. "You must be Sarah Collins." "I'm Linda Henderson." Linda approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to organizing events and managing multiple conversations simultaneously. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her handshake conveyed the kind of strength that came from years of ranch work. Her eyes were sharp with intelligence and genuine interest rather than polite curiosity. "Jake's told me about your orphanage project," Linda continued. "I've been hoping to meet you and learn more about what you're planning." The direct approach eliminated Sarah's anxiety about finding natural conversation openings. Linda's straightforward manner suggested she valued efficient communication over social pleasantries, which aligned perfectly with Sarah's own preferences for substance over style. "Hope Haven Children's Home," Sarah said. 20 beds, designed to house children aging out of foster care or those needing temporary placement while families stabilize. "We're focusing on creating genuine stability rather than just temporary shelter." Linda's expression indicated serious attention to the details. "And you're building this yourself?" "With significant help from Jake's crew for the major construction. But yes, it's primarily a private initiative using my late husband's plans and our combined savings." Sarah had learned to present this information matter-of-factly rather than defensively, emphasizing commitment rather than financial limitations. "Jake mentioned you've been working while pregnant. That takes considerable determination." Linda's tone carried approval rather than concern. "How far along are you?" 7 months now, which is why we're pushing to complete the exterior work before the baby arrives. Interior finishing can happen in smaller increments that accommodate newborn schedules." Sarah placed her hand over the baby's current gymnastics routine, feeling grateful for the movement that reassured her of continued health despite physical demands. Tom Henderson joined their conversation, carrying plates loaded with barbecue and wearing the satisfied expression of a host whose party was succeeding. His resemblance to Jake was evident in their shared height and confident bearing, though. Tom's demeanor was more gregarious and his attention more diffuse. "Sarah, good to meet you officially," Tom said warmly. "My crew's been talking about your project all week. They're impressed with the quality of work you've been doing solo." The compliment from professional construction workers felt particularly meaningful to Sarah. She'd learned to value the opinion of people whose livelihoods depended on recognizing good craftsmanship and solid building practices. "Your crew made all the difference," Sarah replied. "What would have taken me weeks happened in 3 days, and the quality exceeded anything I could have achieved independently." "Jake says you want to understand county foster care policies," Linda interjected, steering the conversation toward more substantive territory. "Are you familiar with the current challenges we're facing with funding and service delivery?" Sarah appreciated Linda's directness and obvious knowledge of relevant issues. This was precisely the kind of informed conversation that could influence Hope Haven's future effectiveness and political viability. "I understand there's discussion about regionalizing services to reduce costs," Sarah said carefully. "But I'm concerned that approach might create other problems, particularly for children who need continuity with their communities during already disruptive periods." Linda nodded approvingly. "Exactly the concern I've been raising in review. Board meetings. Transportation costs alone could eliminate any savings from regional consolidation, and that doesn't account for the emotional costs of separating children from familiar environments." The alignment of their concerns felt encouraging to Sarah. Linda's position on the Foster Care Review Board and her obvious understanding of complex policy implications made her exactly the kind of ally Jake had suggested could influence county decisions. Have you seen data about outcomes for children in regional versus local facilities? Sarah asked. Some, but not as much as I'd like, Linda admitted. Most studies focus on cost comparisons rather than success rates for family reunification or educational continuity. The human factors are harder to quantify, but arguably more important for long-term outcomes. Sarah felt excitement building as she recognized an opportunity to contribute valuable information to Linda's policy advocacy. Her research into comparable facilities had uncovered precisely the kind of outcome data that could strengthen arguments for local services. I've been researching facilities in neighboring counties as part of planning for Hope Haven, she said. I've found several studies that demonstrate significantly better outcomes for children who remain within their home communities during family crisis periods. Linda's attention sharpened visibly. What kind of outcomes? Higher rates of family reunification, better educational performance, fewer behavioral problems, and more successful transitions to independence for children aging out of care. Sarah had memorized these statistics during her preparation for the commissioner's presentation. The data consistently shows that maintaining community connections improves both immediate adjustment and long-term stability. That's exactly the kind of information commissioners need to hear, Linda said with obvious enthusiasm. Would you be willing to share your research with the Foster Care Review Board? We meet monthly, and our recommendations carry significant weight with county decision makers. The invitation exceeded Sarah's most optimistic expectations for the barbecue conversation. Access to the Foster Care Review Board could provide a forum for detailed policy discussion that complemented the more formal commissioner's presentation. I'd be honored to share that information, Sarah said. I want to make sure county decisions are based on complete data rather than just financial projections. Jake had been listening to their exchange with obvious satisfaction, his expression suggesting that the conversation was progressing exactly as he'd hoped. Sarah realized that his introduction strategy had been more sophisticated than casual social facilitation. He'd identified specific opportunities for productive collaboration between people whose goals naturally aligned. Linda, Jake said, joining the conversation more actively. Sarah's also interested in making Hope Haven adaptable to various community needs, depending on how county policies evolve. David's original plans included flexibility for different service models. Linda's interest was immediately evident. What kind of flexibility? Sarah felt comfortable discussing architectural details that demonstrated David's comprehensive planning and her own commitment to community responsiveness, rather than rigid adherence to a single service model. Modular room configurations that can accommodate different age groups or family situations, common areas that can serve various functions, and infrastructure designed to support expanded services if community needs grow. Sarah had been thinking about these adaptability features since her conversation with Jake about uncertainty regarding county decisions. So Hope Haven could serve as emergency shelter, transitional housing, or long-term residence depending on specific circumstances. Linda's question suggested she was thinking strategically about various scenarios that might require different approaches to children's services. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. David believed that good facilities should serve communities for generations, adapting to changing needs while maintaining core commitments to children's welfare. Tom had been following their conversation with the kind of attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite courtesy. His experience with county government through agricultural committees provided valuable perspective on the political dynamics that influenced policy decisions. You know, Tom said thoughtfully, commissioners respond well to proposals that demonstrate fiscal responsibility and long-term thinking. Facilities that can adapt to changing needs represent better investments than single-purpose buildings that might become obsolete. The insight aligned with Jake's earlier guidance about presenting Hope Haven as a practical solution rather than an emotional appeal. Sarah realized that successful advocacy would require demonstrating not just moral imperatives, but sound business planning and community investment principles. "That's exactly how I want to present the project," Sarah said. Hope Haven represents private investment in community infrastructure that addresses current needs while providing flexibility for future challenges. The conversation had attracted several other barbecue attendees, creating an impromptu discussion group about children's services and community resource planning. Sarah found herself answering questions and explaining details with growing confidence, supported by Jake's occasional clarifications and Linda's obvious expertise about policy implications. Dr. Rebecca Chun approached the group carrying her toddler daughter, her medical scrubs replaced by casual clothes, but her professional demeanor still evident in her careful attention to complex discussions. Sarah had heard about Dr. Chun's work with foster children and families in crisis, making her perspective particularly valuable for understanding practical service delivery challenges. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about Hope Haven," Dr. Chun said. "I work with many of the children who would benefit from the kind of stable placement you're planning." Sarah felt honored by attention from someone whose professional expertise directly related to Hope Haven's mission. Medical professionals who worked with vulnerable children understood both the immediate needs and long-term implications of housing stability better than most community members. "What kinds of challenges do you see with current placement options?" Sarah asked. "Primarily distance from family connections and educational continuity," Dr. Chen replied. "Children who are placed in regional facilities often miss medical appointments, struggle with school transitions, and lose contact with siblings who remain in local care. The disruption compounds their trauma rather than providing healing stability." The medical perspective added another dimension to Sarah's understanding of why local facilities mattered beyond simple convenience or cost considerations. Children's physical and emotional health depended on maintaining connections that regional placement made difficult or impossible. "Hope Haven is designed to support those connections," Sarah explained. "Close enough for family visits, integrated with local schools, and structured to maintain sibling relationships even when children can't live with their original families." Dr. Chun's approval was evident in her enthusiastic nodding. "That's exactly what these children need: stability that doesn't require them to abandon everything familiar while they're dealing with family crisis." The gathering support from diverse community professionals made Sarah feel increasingly confident about Hope Haven's potential impact and political viability. Linda's policy expertise, Dr. Chun's medical perspective, and Tom's understanding of county government created a foundation for comprehensive advocacy that addressed various concerns commissioners might raise. "Sarah," Linda said, her tone becoming more businesslike, "I'd like to schedule a time for you to present your research to the Foster Care Review Board. Our next meeting is Wednesday evening, and we always reserve time for community input." The opportunity felt both exciting and intimidating. Presenting to the review board would provide access to influential decision-makers while requiring more formal preparation than casual barbecue conversation allowed. "I'd appreciate that opportunity," Sarah said. "How much time would I have for presentation and questions?" 20 minutes for presentation, another 20 for discussion. Board members are well informed about current challenges, so you can focus on how Hope Haven addresses specific problems rather than general background about foster care needs. Sarah felt her organizational instincts engaging as she considered how to structure an effective presentation within those time constraints. Her research data needed to be compiled into clear visual aids, and her arguments required careful sequencing to build persuasive momentum. "I'll prepare materials that focus on outcome data and practical service delivery improvements," she said. "I want to demonstrate that Hope Haven represents sound investment in proven approaches rather than experimental innovation." Jake had been observing the expanding conversation with obvious satisfaction. his expression suggesting that the afternoon was exceeding his expectations for productive community engagement. Sarah realized that his understanding of Cedar Valley's social networks had enabled connections that would have taken her months to develop independently. The baby began a particularly vigorous gymnastics routine, prompting Sarah to place both hands over her midsection and take a deeper breath. The combination of physical discomfort and social stimulation was becoming overwhelming, but the productive nature of the conversations made her reluctant to withdraw prematurely. "Are you feeling all right?" Dr. Chun asked with professional concern. 7 months pregnant is challenging enough without standing for extended periods in social situations. Sarah appreciated the medical attention even as she felt embarrassed by her obvious discomfort. She'd been pushing herself to maintain normal activity levels, but her expanding pregnancy was making prolonged physical demands increasingly difficult. "Just tired," she said. "This has been wonderful, but I should probably head home and put my feet up for a while." "Before you go," Linda said, "let me give you my contact information. I want to coordinate with you about the review board presentation and discuss how our advocacy efforts can support each other." The exchange of contact information felt like a significant milestone in building the community partnerships that could determine Hope Haven's future success. Sarah realized that Jake's introduction strategy had transformed potential political challenges into collaborative opportunities. As they walked back toward the parking area, Jake's expression reflected satisfaction with the afternoon's outcomes. Sarah felt grateful for his social navigation and strategic thinking, recognizing that her solitary approach to building Hope Haven would have missed crucial opportunities for community engagement. "That went better than I hoped," she said honestly. Linda's support could make a significant difference with the commissioners, and Dr. Chun's perspective adds medical credibility to the arguments for local placement. "You handled the conversations perfectly," Jake replied. "You presented Hope Haven as a practical solution rather than a personal mission, and you demonstrated knowledge that impressed people whose opinions matter in this community." Sarah felt pride in her advocacy performance, but also recognition that effective community engagement required ongoing effort rather than single successful interactions. Building the relationships that would sustain Hope Haven through political and practical challenges demanded consistent attention to other people's concerns and priorities. "Jake," she said as they reached her truck, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done to help with this project. The construction assistance was invaluable, but introducing me to people like Linda and helping me understand community dynamics that's going to determine whether Hope Haven actually serves the children who need it." Jake's response was characteristically direct. "You're doing something important, and important things deserve comprehensive support. Emily would have loved meeting you and hearing about Hope Haven's mission." The reference to his deceased sister created a moment of emotional connection that transcended their practical partnership. Sarah realized that Jake's involvement had become deeply personal, motivated by values and memories that made Hope Haven's success matter to him in ways that extended far beyond community service or charitable assistance. "I wish I could have known her," Sarah said quietly. "She sounds like someone who would have been a wonderful ally for children who needed advocates." "She would have been your first volunteer," Jake said with certainty. Emily had the kind of instinct for recognizing authentic commitment that would have drawn her to Hope Haven immediately. The baby kicked gently, as if responding to the emotional warmth of their conversation. Sarah felt tears threaten, not from sadness but from gratitude for connections that had transformed her solitary struggle into shared purpose, supported by people who understood the value of building things that mattered. "Will you help me prepare for the review board presentation?" she asked. "Absolutely," Jake confirmed. "We'll make sure you have everything you need to convince them that Hope Haven represents the best possible investment in local children's welfare." Sarah drove home feeling more optimistic about Hope Haven's future than she had since beginning the project. The afternoon's conversations had demonstrated that community support existed for her mission, that influential people shared her concerns about children's services, and that effective advocacy could transform potential obstacles into collaborative opportunities. The baby settled into quieter movement as Sarah relaxed in her truck, and she realized that her child would be born into a community that had already begun embracing Hope Haven as a shared project rather than a personal endeavor. Jake's partnership had expanded beyond construction assistance to include social navigation and strategic planning that multiplied her individual efforts exponentially. Tomorrow would bring renewed focus on the practical details of presentation preparation and facility completion. But tonight Sarah allowed herself to feel grateful for unexpected alliances and the growing possibility that David's dream might become reality through the support of people who understood that some things were worth building regardless of the challenges involved. The county commissioner's meeting room buzzed with quiet anticipation as Sarah arranged her presentation materials on the podium. 3 weeks had transformed her from nervous advocate to confident community representative, supported by data that demonstrated Hope Haven's value and partnerships that validated her mission. Linda Henderson sat in the front row, her presence providing both moral support and political credibility. Jake stood near the back wall, his steady gaze offering reassurance that had become essential to Sarah's confidence. Commissioner Patricia Wells called the meeting to order, her businesslike demeanor setting expectations for efficient discussion rather than lengthy debate. Sarah felt the baby shift restlessly, responding to her elevated heart rate and the importance of the moment. That would determine Hope Haven's future. Our next agenda item concerns county foster care services and a presentation from Sarah Collins regarding a proposed local facility, Commissioner Wells announced. Mrs. Collins, you have 20 minutes. Sarah approached the podium with the pout of one. Same determined stride she'd used to climb construction ladders, carrying herself with authority earned through months of building something meaningful from nothing but plans and determination. Her presentation boards displayed outcome statistics, financial projections, and architectural drawings that demonstrated Hope Haven's comprehensive approach to children's services. Commissioners, I'm here to discuss Hope Haven Children's Home and its potential to improve foster care outcomes while reducing county costs. Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from thorough preparation and genuine conviction. Local placement facilities consistently demonstrate superior results compared to regional alternatives. She presented Linda's research data alongside her own findings, creating a comprehensive argument that addressed both financial efficiency and service quality. The commissioners asked pointed questions about operational costs, staffing requirements, and integration with existing county services. Sarah answered each inquiry with specific information that demonstrated months of careful planning and community consultation. The facility design accommodates 20 residents with potential for expansion based on community needs, she explained, pointing to David's detailed architectural drawings. Construction costs are privately funded, requiring minimal county investment while providing maximum service benefit. Commissioner Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression indicating serious consideration of Hope Haven's proposal. What guarantees do we have that this facility will remain operational long-term? Private initiatives sometimes fail when founders encounter personal challenges. The question addressed Sarah's greatest vulnerability, her status as a single person managing an ambitious project while preparing for motherhood. She'd anticipated this concern and prepared a response that emphasized community partnership rather than individual commitment. Hope Haven operates under a board structure that includes local professionals, foster care advocates, and community leaders. Sarah replied, gesturing toward Linda Henderson. The facility belongs to the community it serves, ensuring continuity regardless of changes in individual circumstances. Jake had helped her establish this governance structure, recognizing that sustainable institutions required broader support than single-person leadership could provide. The board included Dr. Chun's medical expertise, Linda's policy knowledge, and business leaders who understood operational management. Commissioner Wells reviewed the financial projections with obvious approval. These numbers suggest significant savings compared to regional transportation and placement costs. Have you verified these estimates with actual service providers? Yes, Sarah confirmed. I've consulted with facilities in similar communities and reviewed actual operational data. The projections are conservative estimates based on proven performance metrics. The presentation concluded with testimonials from professionals who worked with foster children, emphasizing the human benefits that complemented financial advantages. Dr. Chun's letter described medical challenges created by frequent placement changes, while educators documented learning disruptions caused by school transfers. Thank you, Mrs. Collins, Commissioner Wells said. The board will deliberate and announce our decision at next month's meeting. Sarah gathered her materials, feeling cautiously optimistic about the commissioner's reception. Their questions had focused on practical implementation rather than fundamental objections, suggesting serious consideration of Hope Haven's proposal. Linda's supportive presence and the community partnerships she'd built provided confidence that extended beyond her individual advocacy efforts. Jake walked her to the parking lot, his expression reflecting satisfaction with her presentation performance. The evening air carried autumn's crisp promise, reminding Sarah that her due date approached along with Hope Haven's completion deadline. You were impressive in there, Jake said quietly. Professional, well-prepared, and completely convincing about Hope Haven's value to the community. I had excellent coaching, Sarah replied, feeling grateful for strategic guidance that had transformed her passion into effective advocacy. Linda's support made all the difference with the commissioner's reception. They stood beside her truck in comfortable silence, watching other attendees disperse into the darkening evening. Sarah felt the baby's gentle movement, a reminder that new life would soon join their expanding community of people committed to children's welfare. Sarah, Jake said, his tone becoming more personal, regardless of what the commissioners decide. I want you to know that working on Hope Haven has changed something important for me. The shift in his voice suggested a conversation that went beyond their project partnership. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she recognized the moment she'd been unconsciously anticipating for weeks. What kind of something? She asked. Softly. I've been thinking about what Emily would say if she could see what we've accomplished together, Jake said, his gaze direct and sincere. I think she'd tell me that some partnerships are worth building a life around. Sarah felt tears gather as she understood the depth of commitment he was offering. Their collaboration had evolved into something neither had expected, growing from practical assistance into profound connection based on shared values and mutual respect. Jake, she said quietly, I never imagined that building an orphanage would lead to finding someone who understands why that work matters so deeply. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers with tentative gentleness. I'd like to help you raise this baby and run Hope Haven, if you'll have me. Not as a business partner, but as someone who wants to build a family with you. The proposal felt both surprising and inevitable, the natural culmination of weeks spent discovering compatibility that extended far beyond construction projects. Sarah realized that Jake's steady presence had become essential to her sense of security and purpose. Yes, she said simply, because elaborate responses felt unnecessary when the answer was so clear. I'd like that very much. Their kiss was gentle and certain, sealed under Montana stars that witnessed promises made without elaborate ceremony, but with complete sincerity. The baby kicked enthusiastically, as if approving of the expanding family that would welcome new life into a community committed to children's welfare. 2 months later, Hope Haven Children's Home welcomed its first residents as snow began dusting the finished facility that had weathered its second major storm successfully. Sarah held baby, Emily named for Jake's sister, while watching children. Explore rooms designed to provide stability during the most vulnerable periods of their lives. The county commissioners had unanimously approved local foster care services, swayed by comprehensive data and community support that transformed Hope Haven from individual initiative into shared investment. Linda Henderson served as board chairwoman, coordinating services that exceeded everyone's expectations for effectiveness and efficiency. Jake carried moving boxes with the patient strength that had built both ranches and relationships, his commitment to Hope Haven's mission now inseparable from his devotion to the family they were creating together. Sarah watched him interact with the children, seeing Emily's generous spirit reflected in his gentle attention to young people who needed adults who genuinely cared about their welfare. "Think David would approve?" Jake asked quietly, joining Sarah at the window overlooking the common area where children played games and did homework at tables, designed for both individual work and collaborative learning. "I think he'd be amazed that his dream became something even better than he imagined," Sarah replied, feeling grateful for love that had honored the past while building toward a future neither she nor David could have envisioned. Hope Haven had become exactly what its name promised, a place where hope took root in fertile soil prepared by people who understood that some dreams were worth everything it took to make them real. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.